What's up guys, Larry here from Photo Me Larry. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're gonna get into something really cool. This is a Mamiya 645. This is the first medium format camera that I've owned. Let's say you're like me. Let's say you're jumping into medium format for the first time and you buy a Mamiya 645. You wanna know how to use it. You don't have the guide that was written in the 70s. You can't find it online. You can't find even a good video on YouTube that shows you a step-by-step walkthrough on how to use this camera, how to quickly get started and go out and shoot. Well, if that intro wasn't too long, that's what this video is. I'm gonna show you how to basically get this camera rolling, ready to go, and then some tips, advice, and necessary know-hows that you need in order to enjoy using this camera. All right, so let's dive in. All right, so let's start with the anatomy of the camera. So the first thing I'm gonna show you guys is your shutter speed. So you have a wheel here that actually lets you set your shutter speed. What's great about this camera actually is anything above a second is in green, right? So these are your kind of long exposure settings. I consider a second to be long exposure for the type of photography that I do. But anything over a second is in green. Underneath a second, you have half a second in orange, you have a fourth of a second, you have an eighth of a second, you have a 16th of a second or 15th of a second. So you can set your shutter speeds here. This camera body, it goes up to a 500th of a second. That's pretty good, you know, for a lot of use cases, but if you want a higher shutter speed, you can go with the Mamiya 1000S. You'll still get 15 to 16 shots per roll, but you'll have double the shutter speed capability. So here's where I set the shutter speed on the camera. So next, we come to the top of the camera, and so here's where you can actually set your camera's aperture. So this first ring on the lens, because the aperture blades are inside of the lens, all your aperture settings actually come with the lens, on this system at least. So on this 55mm lens, the red dot corresponds with what setting you're picking. So as you can see right now, my camera's at 2.8, 8, 11, 16, 22. So this is the maximum aperture that I can go to, f22. So this gives me all the details, everything that I can see. And then this is the lowest aperture that I can go to, so it lets in the most amount of light. It's the widest aperture setting and allows for me to try to get as much creamy, smooth depth of field in the background as I can possibly get. The first ring is where you set your aperture settings. This red dot right here is what you want to line everything up to. And then here's how you focus. Obviously you have about an inch thick control right here ring that you can just kind of spin, and this one's a little tight, so it takes a decent amount of, I don't want to say strength, but it's not letting me like I can't accidentally change my focus. You actually have to turn with intent, and I actually do like that about this camera. So at this point in the video, you should know how to set your aperture. You should know how to set your focal length. You should know how to set your shutter speed. Those are the first three primary things you need to know about taking the picture. Great, now let's talk about actually taking the picture. You gotta put in the film. Putting in the film is pretty easy for this camera. Now this button indicates, oh, if you just slide this over, the film will pop out, but that is actually not the case. There's a secret button right here. You press in for your little film canister identifier and then slide this over, and it allows you to pop off the film back. One thing you may notice if you're using this camera for the first time, you might hear like a winding spooling sound when you pop this off, and especially you'll hear this if you've put film in there. Basically, it's the spring resetting for your shutter counter. So right here, whenever you put in new film, this is always gonna reset back to S. Whenever you pop this off, this will reset back to S. So if you've taken 15, 20 shots or whatever, and you're just playing with the camera, even when there's no film in it, as soon as you pop the film back off, you'll hear this unspool and reset back to S. So, first thing you do, pinch the 120, and then you can pull out your film canister. Definitely want to close this all the way back up at this point in time. You don't want to let dust or dirt particles or anything get inside of here. Even if you're just changing the film, I always close this and set this off to the side. So this is a roll of 120 film, which is going to go into my 120 film canister. I like Fujifilm because the user experience of loading and saving this film is actually pretty good. So from the edges where you see the perforated crease, you can just rip right there, rip off the top, pull it right out. You're gonna see a tape belt. You can just grab that, tear it slowly, toss it because we don't need it anymore. The important piece is this little leader right here. All you wanna do, grab your film canister. In the top loaded one, So we want the black side facing us because we load it backwards, right? So you want it to unfold this way with the black facing you. Just pull a little bit this way, and then you grab the leader, tip that little guy in there, and then just start rolling this one. Okay, you only want to tighten it until you feel it a little snug, because there's an important step. You're gonna see some information, and it says start. Now, you see on your film canister that there's a start line right here. So all you want to do is just make sure that the start lines line up. So I'll do it at this angle so that you can probably see. But right about there is good. Take the 120. Take your camera, push the button, slide it over. Open up your film. Big roll on top, little roll on bottom, 120 facing up. Poke it in. Close it till you hear the click. You're gonna hear the little ding. That's when you know your film is loaded. Come back to your side, make sure it's on S. You see it's on S, perfect. So now that the film is loaded and the camera is on S, we want this to be on 1. So just roll it till you feel it snug. And it stopped me, and look what it's on, 1. I'm ready to shoot. If you want to use all the shutter speeds that this camera has to offer, you have to put in a battery. It takes a 6-volt battery, and I use the Energizer. I think it's the A544. So your camera takes one of these batteries. All you got to do, on the bottom, you'll see this little tray right here. So to change or add a battery to your Mamiya 645, all that you have to do is, you can even just take your finger, rotate it this way. The battery tray slot will pop out, and you just pop in a new 6-volt battery. Close this, and the snap will already be in place, and you don't even have to do anything other than that. To make sure your battery is good, you see this little red button here. If you hit this red button, it will light up the green light on the left side right next to the shutter speed wheel. This is how you know your battery's still good. Now, I've had this camera for about 3 weeks now, and I think the battery has been in there for about 2 weeks straight, and the battery's still there. So there's probably a battery draw from this battery that's happening when the connections are there. But if you don't feel like buying a whole bunch of batteries just to make sure that this camera will always work, you can easily pop the battery out and just set it aside. I just leave it in there for as often as I shoot. I'm sure I'll get maybe 4 or 5 rolls through this thing before I even ever waste the battery. But as you can tell, I also have extra batteries. I bought 4 of these at one time, so. All right, guys, so now we're about halfway through the video, and we're gonna get into the part where I'll say that I'm gonna start solving problems for you or do some pre-use troubleshooting. So I'm sharing this information for other potential beginners who might run into the same situations. So let's talk about the viewfinder on top of the camera. All right, so this is pretty easy. It's a waist level viewfinder. You can just pull up the tab from the back, and then boom, it opens up. And so I was like, oh, this is great. Now, I also knew that there was a magnifying lens that's on the top, and you need this to pop open. So the first thing I did, I was pressing on this. I was like, oh, that doesn't work. And I saw this little button here, and so I pulled it, that didn't work. So then I pushed it, that didn't work. And then I was like, oh, well, what the hell? It's a lever. The way that the lever is designed, it looks like it's supposed to be pulled like a tab, and then I tried to push it. The secret is you actually push it into the body, and it flips up pretty easy. So that was the first key that you need to know. So what you do now is you can look through this hole to line up your image, and then you use the focus wheel to adjust. The next point of frustration that I had is sometimes you'll look through here and you actually won't see anything. So here is a lever that actually pulls your mirror up. So what I did was I flicked it down, flicked it back up. Oh, I just fired a shot accidentally. That sucks. It's so hard to do this with one hand. The next thing that I want to call out for you guys is the way that this camera works because of this viewfinder. As I rotated my camera to the right, I noticed that my image actually looked like it was moving to the left. As I moved to the left, the image looks like it was moving to the right. So it's just, as you turn this way, it feels like your camera is doing, or as you turn this way, it feels like your camera's doing this. And as you turn this way, it feels like your camera's doing that, right? So it's like, it's got this opposite effect. But that's just something that you're gonna have to learn and get used to. And once you shoot a couple of times, it's actually not that bad. Right, rotating my shoulders to the left. So this thing is clean and crisp, and this camera is really old, but I love shooting this way. So I'm really excited about this camera body, and I'm gonna do my best to hold this camera without firing another shot. I noticed when I was hand holding and I was using low shutter speeds, I was even using like a 60th of a second, a 30th of a second, expecting that that was gonna be fast enough. But the camera actually, when the mirror flips, I think that there's enough motion in there that I was getting an extra level of just blur to some of my photos because of the mechanics of the camera. So I suggest, if you can, always shoot with a tripod if you're shooting anything lower than a 60th of a second. That's just my personal opinion. We need to talk about actually taking a picture and pressing the shutter button. Now this one is super simple. On the 645, there's two places that you can actually press the shutter button, and one is special. So right here at the top, this is a shutter release. This will take a picture. And then also at the bottom, this also is a shutter release point. And so this one is usually the best one to use for your finger, but when you're pressing this button, especially when you're hand holding, it introduces a little bit of camera shake. That's why I'm really glad that they have the secondary one, because with the secondary one, you can hook up a shutter release cable, and I got this for like 10 bucks online. I will say, if you plan on shooting a Mamiya 645, get yourself a shutter release cable. There is no excuse. This shutter release cable will save you so many bad photos, it's not even funny. What I've noticed is anything that I shoot under about a 60th of a second, even when hand holding, I know that like my hands and just my use of the camera and the camera mechanics itself, there's just I can tell that the movement, it has made its way to the image. So I say if it's 60 or less, you have to use a shutter release cable, and it's super easy. You just screw this cable into the front. You thread it right there. You just screw it on in. Once it's hooked up, you can throw this camera on a tripod, and you do that, you've taken the picture. Again, you just want to hook that up in there, and then that's your picture. Instead of pressing this down and like pressing the whole camera body down, or especially when you're hand holding. All right, the next tip I have for you guys is making sure that your exposure settings are gonna come out very well, because again, every time you take a click on this camera, like you've seen, you will be taking a picture that you've spent money on because you bought a roll of film. So you don't wanna mess around and be out there wasting your shots. So what I personally have, just in my own photography use, I have a Sekonic light meter. I've had this for a while, but you know, if you don't wanna shell out like, I think maybe 230 bucks to get something like this, you can even just download a light meter app off of your cell phone. Light meter is the one that I use when I have my cell phone available. And better yet, you can use another camera as a light meter. So here's another trick. A lot of people who are going in a medium format usually already have some sort of other camera. So let's say you have like a beginner camera, or really any modern DSLR or mirrorless camera available. It may sound like cheating, but this will definitely help you. I will have that camera on hand and like do a test shot on that camera and be like, oh, okay, it says these settings. Or even you can play around and test your settings on that digital and be like, okay, cool, this is the image quality that I want. So then apply those settings to your medium format camera, boom, same results, but with film grain on 120. So you'll be getting a 4:5 image instead of a 35mm image. But you know, I always meter when I'm shooting this camera. I get 16 shots on this one. I'll get 10 shots on the RB67. I will not waste the film. Make sure you have I would say a trustworthy way that you have enough experience with, like you know how to use this, or you know how to use the light meter on your phone in order to get great shots. That is the second tip I have for you. The third tip I have is just this button right here. Let me move my little tail out of the way. So here is your multi-exposure switch. What's cool about this camera is if you want, you can tell this camera to allow you to take multiple shots on one single roll of film. So if you're, you know, like, hey, I want to do like real ghostly images, or you just want to have this like really cool effect where two images are kind of superimposed on top of each other, you can set this switch to multi-mode, and then it'll allow you to fire an image, wind it, fire an image, wind it, fire an image, and you won't have used 3 exposures. You actually would have only used 1 exposure and taken 1 picture. Make sure before you start, after you load your roll of film, that you always have that set up so that you're not in multi-mode. To engage multi-mode, you just rotate that switch down to the bottom, and there you go. All right, guys, thanks for watching this video as I took you through using the Mamiya 645 for the first time. If, like me, you were out there looking for information on how to use this camera specifically, I hope that I helped. Again, I'm Larry. I run this channel, Photo Me Larry. It's all about photography, whether that's digital, whether that's film, whether that's even your dang iPhone or a pinhole camera, however you can take pictures. I'm enjoying exploring the art of photography and just sharing the experience, sharing the fun, you know, sharing what I know. Lastly, if you don't know, I also run a blog. It's called Photo Me Larry, photomelarry.com. I just kicked that up, so I think there's like 10 articles up there right now, but you can check that out as well, photomelarry.com. It's a blog, it's got great content, and I add to that blog every Sunday as well. So boom, there's 2 places to hang out. If you like what you see, you wanna stay involved, you wanna see the stuff that's coming, because promise you, there's more on the way. You guys don't even know what's in these bags right here. You guys don't even know the new content that's on the way. Definitely subscribe. I would appreciate it. You know, you can check me out on Instagram, all that stuff, yada, yada. I just hope that you like what I do. That's all. So catch you later. Peace.